And welcome to the Senate Judiciary Committee. Our first item on the agenda is, do we have any bill introductions? First from committee members. And not seeing any. How about anyone in the audience? Any requests for bill introductions? Not seeing any. Want to remind everyone that on the session planning calendar, the last date to request bill introductions in non-exempt committees, which this is one, is Monday, February 5th. Please notice that we are not meeting as a committee this Friday, February 2nd, and we are on call of the chair to meet Thursday, February 1st. So if you have a request for bill introduction, please make all efforts to get it introduced tomorrow, January 31st. It remains to be seen whether we will be meeting Monday, February 5th. So with that then, if we could quickly review meeting minutes from January 23rd, 24th, and 25th. You'll have the drafts there in front of you. If you want to take a few moments, and then I will, if there's no discussion, I'll entertain a motion. Yes, Senator Wilborn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to move that we approve the minutes for 123, 124, and 125 of 2024.
Is there a second? Senator Gossage. Any discussion? You all have heard the motion. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, same sign. The motion carries. We are now then ready for our presentation, an update on Senate Bill 228 from Ed Klump, Kansas Sheriff's Association, Kansas Association of Chiefs of Police, and Kansas Peace Officers Association. Welcome to committee. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ed Klump with the three associations the chair just named off. I won't go through them again. It's a pleasure to be here to talk to you about this. As you recall, last year, about this time, Senate Bill 228 started its way through the system. And this was a bill that was proposed by the Sheriff's Association to update the entire Chapter 19, Article 19 statutes, which hadn't been revised for many of them for over 100 years. And as you can imagine, they were seriously out of date. And so we appreciate that. So what I want to do today is just kind of go over some highlights of some of the major changes. And I'd like to start with Statute 19-1930. And that is the one that had to do with the medical examination prior to booking a person into the jail. And you'll recall that the Sheriff's Association and the Chiefs Association got together before the bill was introduced. We worked together to come to terms on that process because we were encountering some issues along those lines. And through this, we found a state statute in another state that was being used that was working pretty well for them. So we kind of modeled it after that. And so we came in with support from both the sheriffs and the chiefs on those amendments. And overall, those are working well. As you can imagine, when you make that kind of a change, there's a training curve that had to be done. And our associations continue to work together on presenting training to the officers and the jail staffs so they know how this is supposed to work. That's still ongoing. We just had a conversation last week about working with the Kansas Law Enforcement Training Center to develop an online training that can be put out there so the officers can look at that at any time and participate in that training. The only issue that we've had really come up in this so far, I mean, there was some bugs in it between, the arresting officers and the jail staff at times, but far less than we were having before the bill. So the only real issue we've had is we've had some medical facilities who have declined to give us any documentation saying the person was in physical shape to go into the jail. And they're citing HIPAA. And we always run into these HIPAA issues between the medical profession and the jail, or law enforcement, excuse me. And so one just has to keep in mind that you're dealing with attorneys on both sides, and attorneys on both sides are ethically obligated to protect, to the best of their ability, their client. And so we always have that gap in the middle that we have to fill. And so most of these, I think, are being worked out from what I understand with discussions between the medical facilities leadership and attorneys, and then the law enforcement attorneys. But it has produced some results which has resulted in additional costs, mostly for city agencies, in that even though we have one facility that says, yes, they're okay, or maybe it's the EMS people, we still have to take them to an emergency room. We have to go through that process. Then we have to pay those fees for the emergency room to get the documentation. But we're working those out. In the end, I think everybody agrees that the assurance this gives that that person is medically cleared before they go into the jail is very important. And we think it's working and doing what we intended it for it to do. And we appreciate the legislature's attention to that last year. The second area I want to talk about briefly is the reimbursement to the counties for the cost of holding prisoners while we're waiting for bed space to do the competency evaluations and treatment. And that was something that was added in this committee, and we appreciate that addition. And it is working. I did get some numbers from KDADS just late last week, and I have those in my testimony there. $4.3 million was reimbursed for fiscal year 23. The bill, as it was written, was retroactive back to July 1st of 2022. So the counties reimbursed that cost for that fiscal year. And then as of last week, they had reimbursed $1.872 million in the current fiscal year. So not quite 7 months into it. So it looks like that number may be going down a little bit in this year, but it could be we just haven't had the claims filed yet. So we don't know for sure. I'd point out those are some pretty large numbers. And, we presented several times in several different committees our concern of the cost that was being shifted down to the counties due to this waiting time. And I think this pretty well matches the figures that we were estimating at the time of what this were costing the counties. And so I think that's pretty important. The other thing that I have to say on that, I've had several people that have contacted me and said, wow, that's a lot of money that we're reimbursing. It is. There's a way to stop that, fix the problem, and get the capacity of the system up where we don't have to wait a year for treatment and a year for evaluations. If that waiting time goes away, this cost goes away. And we have several things in the works that I think are going to have an impact on this. The first one is the funding the legislature did for the South Central Kansas facility. That's going to have 25 beds for competency. And so that should have a pretty sizable impact on this wait time. The problem with that is it's probably going to be in 2026 before that facility opens. So we're still, a couple of years away from that. The other one is the development of the in-jail evaluations. And KDADS has been working on that. They've been doing some training for the community mental health centers to conduct those services in the jails. Not all prisoners will qualify for that. They'll be in such a serious mental health state that they need inpatient, and those will still have to go to the state hospitals. But we do believe that there is hope in that. However, that program's been around actually since before COVID, and then it got derailed during COVID. But it's not being used very much yet, so we're not seeing any impact from that. So on the back of our testimony, I have a chart there, and I think this is important for you to see of the status of what the data shows on the competency waiting times. So that first line there is the average number of people on the wait list as of the last day of each month of the year. and these are by calendar year. And you'll see for the wait list is actually looks like it's getting a little shorter on a downward trend for evaluations, but it's going up pretty dramatically on the wait time for treatment. And so the trend is that overall the wait times are still going up, not down. The inpatient evaluations for for the evaluation treatment are listed there. You see those aren't very high numbers. And I note later on in the testimony that if you look at that rate of admissions, if no new people were added to the wait list, it would take us 12 months to eliminate the wait list for evaluations and about 11 months to eliminate the wait list for treatment. And of course, we know that's not true, that people are being added to it all the time. In fact, when you look at the number of people on the wait list, the trend is that it appears there's more people being added to the wait list every year than is being taken off the wait list. And so we still have a problem there. Like I say, the answer to stopping the reimbursements is to increase the capacity of the system so we don't have the wait list. The last part that I want to address is the changes that were made to KSA 19-1903. That has to do with the separation of the sexes in the jail. When we proposed the bill, we had one thing in that section that was concerning to us. The old law required that if a husband and wife were incarcerated in the jail, they had to be in the same cell. It doesn't work out too good if you just brought them in on domestic violence where they both attacked each other. But, so we needed that change. And this committee added some things in there trying to address the transgender issues. And what happened in that, and we really haven't had any issues with that I know of right now. It's been kind of a struggle on how we instruct the jails to operate this. But what happened is we had some provisions put in Senate Bill 228 early in the process. And then, of course, Senate Bill 180 was passed later on. And you recall 180 had kind of the similar provisions, but more that applies to every statute in the statute books, not just to 19-1930. And so now we have a little bit different standards in one statute, and then we have Senate Bill 180, which actually doesn't conflict with what's in 19-1930, but it adds some things. And it adds some things that's very helpful to us. And so I put that language in there in the testimony down towards the bottom half of the second page. What's in bold is what came out of Senate Bill 180 currently in KSA 77-207. And those things are not included in what's in 1903. We believe they still apply because of the way Senate Bill 180 was worded to apply to, throughout the statutes. But there's some very specific things there to the jails that has been helpful to us in applying 1930 language. And so with that, Madam Chair, I would be glad to answer any questions you have. But overall, we want to thank this committee for their work on this. We want to thank the legislature for passing this. We really needed to update those statutes. And the most important thing is how we have, I think, made it safer for people going into the jails to make sure we're getting that adequate medical review before they're booked into the jails.
Thank you, Mr. Klump, and thank you to your organizations for bringing this to the legislature's attention. You said that some of the statute hadn't been updated in over 100 years, and you gave kind of one example of what that looked like over 100 years ago. It doesn't look like we need to operate our jails the same way currently. Thank you for the very comprehensive report. Are there questions? I do have a couple.
Okay.
You've touched on 3 areas of the bill. The first one you talked about was HIPAA concerns regarding the medical facilities provider and law enforcement. Can you give us a brief insight into how that's being worked out, or the two sides are talking and figuring out a fix?
So, as you can imagine, the attorneys for the medical industry advise their people to err on the side of caution of not releasing something they're not sure they can. And that makes sense. In HIPAA, which of course is a federal law, and we can't really impact that by local legislation, But in HIPAA, there are some very specific provisions about what law enforcement gets access to. And so sometimes there's a lot of cloudy area in this. So in this case, let's say EMS responds to a call, they examine the person, they don't need to go to the hospital. Maybe they need a Band-Aid and a wound washed or something like that. And in the opinion of the EMS people, they are safe to be admitted into the jail. However, they won't give us a piece of paper saying that. And so when we get to the jail, we don't have anything to provide the jail. And so then the jail wants something in writing, and we ended up taking that person to the emergency room, having them examined there. And of course, they're cleared. And since we are taking them there, we're paying that bill. And since we're paying the bill, we usually don't have any trouble getting that document from them at that point. If the person wants to authorize the release of that information, they can. But as you can imagine, most of the people that we're arresting and putting in jail aren't necessarily cooperative with us and willing to do those things and want to make our life as hard as they can make it. So we're working through it by what we've been suggesting to our agencies that bring this up is get a meeting between the agency heads of the law enforcement and the medical facility, ask for your attorneys to be present. Let's talk through this. Let's see how we can work this out so we can at least get something on paper that says, in our opinion, this person's safe to be incarcerated.
I'm glad to hear they're talking and working through that and
yes,
getting that resolved, hopefully.
We like that solution much better than legislation. It's a lot easier.
Yes, when the parties agree and they've worked out a compromise. The second area you talked on was reimbursement to the counties for the wait time while, prisoners are being held waiting for a competency evaluation. And I think you mentioned there was a way to reduce the cost of that, but I didn't catch what the way was.
The way to reduce the cost is to reduce the wait time. Because we're paid, for each day that person's in jail because of the wait list. So once we get the capacity of the system up and we can reduce that wait time, then this reimbursement cost will go down because we don't have the cost to reimburse. And that's really where we want to be, because this is, there's a lot of issues along this other than just the cost of it. We also have to be concerned about the rights of the prisoners and how long we're holding them waiting for these competency evaluations and treatment to be done. And right now, the typical wait time seems to be about 10 and 11 months on the average for evaluation. And then if the evaluation shows they need treatment, then we have another wait list of that length of time. So Sheriff Easter gave a presentation in another committee last week, and he mentioned that he has one there that's well over 2 years now, that through the evaluation and treatment process that we're still waiting to finalize.
And what is taking so long? Is it shortage of
capacity? It's capacity of the hospitals.
Okay.
And that's why the South Central facility, we think, is going to make a big difference in that, because 25 beds will be dedicated to the competency side. And that should free up space then in both Larned. A few of these get done in Osawatomie. Most of them are done in Larned. But if we can free those beds up in the other two hospitals, then the rest of the state won't have as long a wait list, because those people aren't going into the wait list for those facilities. So there's a lot of work being done on this, and I don't want you to have the impression that KDADS isn't attempting to address the problem. They are, but it's just a long road, and it's a struggle to find the right answer to make an impact. I think it's also important to know Kansas isn't the only one with this problem. Missouri's wait list is worse than ours. And so it's a national problem. It's not just here. We all know that the mental health capacity, not just for competency and emergency commitments, but mental health capacity in general is very, very problematic across the country right now. And this is just one part of it.
The last area you talked about in your presentation is regarding separating the sexes while incarcerated in jail. And if I'm recalling correctly, during the hearing, we were hearing testimony that it was kind of piecemeal how the 105 counties across the state of Kansas were handling those types of issues. So if that's if my recollection is correct, has Senate Bill 228 helped kind of standardize that so it's not such a struggle for each county to determine how they should operate?
I would probably have to say no. It really hasn't impacted it much because the struggle isn't with what needs to be done. I think what's stated in the statute is generally what we were trying to accomplish, but the struggle is when you have a transgender person that is claiming to be a sex other than their birth sex, then how do we provide the separation adequately in what is the facility requirement to do that? And so, our larger jails have the capacity and the design that they can accommodate things like that. Our small jails usually don't have a lot of capacity and a lot of flexibility on that. We always have separated females and males, except apparently 100 years ago. But as long as I've been in law enforcement, we have been. So this is just kind of a new twist to it. We have a lot of guidance from in our training with legal advice from people that study the case laws on this across the country. And of course, they're constantly developing. And so we get good guidance in our training to our jails and how to do this. And we really haven't had a major issue that I know of in any of the jails with it. So the statute, I think, kind of solidified what was trying to be done. And it's still just a logistical issue of space and how do we get the separation we need.
Well, I'm glad to hear it helped solidify kind of maybe some practices that were already in place and kind of put it in writing. Some Kansans might wonder, following along online or looking at this later, do we have situations of where we have claiming, transgender and, do we have prisoners like that currently in our county jails? Or
Absolutely, and I'm sure we
okay.
have them in the state prison as well. So the problem is when a person truly has changed their sex from their birth sex, and then what do you do with that? I mean, how do you classify this person in relationship to people that maintain their birth sex and all that, and do it in a safe way that people aren't endangered? Because our responsibility is to every prisoner that we do everything we can to keep them safe, even from attack from other prisoners and stuff. And so it's really a big issue. It's a big legal issue. And like I say, we do a very good job of every year we do training for our jail. The association provides that, and we bring in legal experts on what the latest case law is and keep them up to date on it. And that's what's important, that we follow the case law so our counties aren't getting sued.
We heard from Department of Corrections earlier, and they're keeping track of populations within the state prisons by male and female. Are our county jails doing the same? And then how do they, what happens when someone claims to be something other than their biological sex? How does that fit into the population numbers or the data you're keeping?
I'm not sure I can answer that because we have 94 county jails now. We have 11 counties that don't operate a jail anymore, that contract with neighboring counties. And so each one's going to have a little bit different policy, I think, in how they categorize it in their system. But I can tell you that the direction that they get is you look at each case individually and you ask yourself, what is the potential risk to this person that you're booking in? What's the potential risk to the people that's going to be around them in the place that you assign them to within the jail? And how do we address that? And in some cases, that means that person is isolated from both sides, and that's where it becomes a problem in a small jail. But those cases are rare. Usually we get them worked out without any major complications, from what I'm being told.
Thank you, committee. I've asked quite a few questions. Do we have any questions from the committee? And not seeing any then, thank you, Mr. Klump, for your
Okay.
presentation and for the update. And I think it's good to hear follow-up. We just updated a 100-year-old statute last
Yeah.
session, and how's it going? So,
Yeah, and we appreciate the opportunity to come in and visit with you again and tell you how this is going. And overall, I can tell you we are elated with the changes and they're working well, and we appreciate the effort that went into this.
well, that's good to hear. The committee worked hard on this, as did the legislature as a whole, and we appreciate the report. Glad to hear it's working out well. Thank you for bringing that to us as well. Committee, there's uh, nothing else on our agenda today. We have completed our work for today. And please recall that we don't have committee this Friday. And when the agenda comes out for next week tomorrow, check to see if we're meeting on Monday, February 5th. In the event that we're not, you might want to get those requests for bill introduction in tomorrow, which may be our last meeting before the February 5th deadline for request for bill introductions in this committee. So with that, then, thank you everyone for your attention. Thank you to staff and those following along in the committee meeting room and online. With that, we are adjourned.